Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's Friday. You made it to another Friday. Friday's very troublesome in the Trump administration. The start of the weekend always kind of bad news in terms of what bad news are we going to get. But what can we do? You gotta take the weekend as it comes. You can turn off the social media over the weekend and remain blissfully ignorant of all that goes on over the weekend. We'll catch you up again on Monday. Greg Dworkin will even be here to help us catch up on Monday. So, you know, it may be something you want to do, but not just yet. Don't turn it off just yet. We'll try and catch you up for what happened during the week that we may have missed already. And there's always something, because you got to make room. You got to make choices. It's about choices. I don't know. I guess everything is always about choices. No different there than any other presidency. But we also try to set you up for the weekend. If you do pay attention, what might you be hearing about? Or what background information might help you make more sense of what's going on? And the answer to that is nothing. There's just no way to make any sense of what's going on. That's just not a real thing that can be done anymore. That's sort of where we are at this point. I discovered last night, and I put it away just because, I don't know, it's happening. And as much as I dislike the idea of reposting screenshots of Truth Social posts or even Trump's Twitter posts or whatever, I guess they have some cultural relevance just so that you're up on the latest jokes when people make reference to the latest dumb thing that has been said. And I don't know if this is the latest dumb thing, but it is a dumb thing, and it happened in between the time we spoke last and now. I don't know what triggered it. I'm just not sure. But I don't know if it matters, but to the extent that we're trying to keep tabs on, Trump's mental state, I guess we pay attention to this. I don't know what, I guess because it became May. It's May 2nd right now, as everybody knows, because I just told you earlier. That's not the reason it's May 2nd, but that's the reason I told you. Anyway, May 8th is coming up. That is known... has been generally known as Victory in Europe Day, VE Day, the day of the Nazi surrender in World War II. Less widely acknowledged and celebrated now that the war is 80 years in the past. But while that generation was still alive, it was certainly frequently marked, and we still keep a memory of it and everything. But I don't know. So Trump, I guess. It was May, and he said, May 8th, something, yada, yada. Now, of course, the war, particularly for America, dragged on into August as they worked to defeat Japan in that. So, we don't necessarily mark it as the end of World War II, but it was a big and important day. Trump, I guess, decides to react to it by, I don't know what. He's like angry about it somehow, and he says... I'll go retrieve the thing, but it doesn't make any sense. And I was wondering if anybody could make any more sense of it for us. You need like a Trump whisperer to try to figure out, what do you think is motivating him to do this? And what does he mean when he says this thing? All right. So someone grabbed it, and it says, it's on Truth Social. So many of our allies and friends are celebrating May 8th. Not yet, they're not. It's May 2nd right now, but they're celebrating May 8th as Victory Day. But now, okay, right, they may be. And then, of course, just to destroy everything and to make sure that we have no diplomatic relations with anybody, anywhere, particularly our traditional allies, which if your mission is to blow up NATO, this makes a certain amount of sense, right? You say, so there's many of our friends and allies are celebrating May 8th as Victory Day, but the United States, we did more than any other country by far in producing a victorious result on World War II, World War II. Disputed. And of course, the nature of it was very different for Europeans Then, oh, okay. Well, I've been handed an updated something or other, an interpretation of what's going on in his head, and I think that's probably largely true. It's just that, well, we'll get to it in a second. First you have to hear what he said, although maybe you read it already. So there he is saying, we did more than any other country by far, in winning World War II. We did it. Everybody else sucked, right? I guess for an idiot who's not paying any attention in history class or just has no empathy or never watched any movies or anything, I mean, to say, and maybe it comes from the movies. Well, here in America, we watched movies about the American forces prevailing in World War II. But the other country, I guess you could look at it and say, well, they lost. They were occupied. We won. Well, what about the UK? They were never occupied. Yeah, well, they're basically us. I have no idea what would really motivate that mode of thinking. And of course, these countries that had resistance movements where civilians were fighting the Nazis on their own, essentially, and put in incredibly difficult positions, captured, tortured, murdered, having to, turn against their neighbors if their neighbors were informants. It was insane. I think everybody knows that. Everybody who's seen movies about World War II knows this. Anyway, and of course, the Soviet-Russian losses in World War II far exceed anyone else's. Anyway, many of our allies and friends are celebrating May 8th as Victory Day, but we did more than any other country by far in producing a victorious result in World War XI. I'm sure. I am hereby, ready? I love the formality. Hereby, by this stupid post on a social media site that nobody looks at, except, by the way, for everybody who screenshots it and passes it around. I don't know. I at least don't do that, but I am interested to see when he says something particularly dumb. I have to admit that. I am hereby renaming May 8th as Victory Day for World War II. And November 11th, Armistice Day, right? Or Veterans Day here in the United States. And November 11th as Victory Day for World War I. Anyway, we won both wars. Nobody was close to us in terms of strength, bravery, or military brilliance. But we never celebrate anything. That's because we don't have leaders anymore that know how to do so. We are going to start celebrating our victories again. So, okay, unhinged, stupid, foolish, undiplomatic, ahistorical, all the things that you would expect out of a Donald Trump post. But also, did we lose track of this? Everybody is saying May 8th is Victory Day. But we were so strong, and they're so wrong about this, and we're so right, that I hereby proclaim May 8th to be Victory Day. Boom! Morons. I got you, suckers. I hope you all just suck it. What a bunch of idiots. You, an idiot, said May 8th was Victory Day. Me, a genius, has to straighten you out. May 8th, from here on in, shall forevermore be known as Victory Day. Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to correct your stupid moronness. I don't know. He stayed awake to do this. All right. So why did he do it? Well, okay. The theory that's been floated here in a fresh sheet of 8.5 by 11 paper that I can now use for scrap, that he's angry when anyone, for instance, Europe, who he hates because he loves Vladimir Putin, and Vladimir Putin hates, or at least covets, Western Europe. So he said I should hate them, so I do, because money. He's angry when anyone gets credit for something instead of him. Of course, he is the personal embodiment of the United States, born, 2 years after the war ended. So anyway, I guess that's where we are. It's bad news. Again, just to be reminded that our president is a psycho and can't really even follow. He can't keep his train of thought on the tracks for the length of a Truth Social post. May 8th, Victory Day, Victory Day. What are you proclaiming? I lost I lost my train of thought. I came here to say Europe sucks, and then I don't know, something happened. Anyway, it's just one of many ridiculous things that we're going to have to deal with over the past from the past week. That one slipped by us, but only because it came after the show on Thursday. So we're up to date on that. He's been angry tweeting about some other things too, and I don't know what they are. They're not as interesting. Here's what's happened in the day since we spoke to you last. What's his name? The next terrible national security advisor. Mike Waltz. Yeah, he's fired. So, happy 100 days. That is at least, well, he made it to 101 days. That's a sort of a roundish number. So that's it. Good for you. That's a plenty of time to serve as national security advisor. I believe that I saw someone did some counting that Mike Waltz has been Donald Trump's 7th national security advisor. Possibly 8th. I don't remember exactly, but somebody counted him up. World record, breaking all the records. So, he's in his 5th year as president, I guess, technically. Right. So 8 of them, and some of them last a matter of 2 weeks, whatever. Mike Waltz, he may land on his feet, as it turns out, but we watched the firing kind of develop in real time. Everybody knew that he was on the ropes. But yesterday, as Trump was getting ready to take a trip somewhere, I think he went down to Florida early for the weekend. There's a fundraiser going on for somebody else. I think it's Byron Donalds having a fundraiser. He's going to go down there. Anyway, they were making a trip, and everybody, I don't know, he makes everybody go with him, get out in a helicopter, take Marine One to Andrews, and then get on Air Force One for the trip down to Florida. And I guess everybody then piles out of the helicopter as news starts swirling that Waltz might be out. And Waltz is on the helicopter. Anyway, everybody piles out of the helicopter. They chat for a while, and then they start boarding Air Force One. And Waltz, I guess, just stays there. So I must have told him on the helicopter or something like that, or made him read his tweet or something about being fired on the helicopter. So he's out. How's the economy for you personally, Mike Waltz? Well, anyway, turns out he may land on his feet in terms of Trump has posted, again, because it's so official and it has, all the effect of legal everything somehow, that he intends to fill the still empty seat at the UN that, what's her name, Stefanik isn't taking, with Mike Waltz. Like, I'm sure they'll be very happy to have it. So now that's a Senate approved thing. National Security Advisor, as I recall, is not. Do they vote? Do they Senate approve that guy? I don't think so. Anyway, often when someone is in a Senate approved position and they move to another Senate approved position, there's a question of whether or not they have to be approved again for that other position. And I think it usually comes up in terms of moving them to that position in an acting capacity. Right. And then it's considered to be okay, and that the acting appointment can last longer than usual. You can make a recess appointment of the person, and for instance, and it doesn't have to terminate at the same point in time that a non-Senate approved recess appointment has to, because there has been that review, even though it was for a different job. I'll have to brush up on what the rules are. At any rate, there's nothing official about it, and they've done none of the paperwork for it, and I don't know whether the Senate considers Mike Waltz to be occupying that position in an acting capacity or any other. But it is interesting that he could be so incompetent as to be fired, but then, okay, well, we'll stash him at the UN, because I don't care about the UN. And in the meantime, who is the national security advisor at the moment? He has named Marco Rubio as his acting national security advisor for the time being, even though he's also, he's Secretary of State, even though he's acting like an a-hole as Secretary of State. He is confirmed there. He's the interim director still, or had been the interim director of the remnants of USAID. He had another job somewhere too, where he was stuck in to, fill in for somebody who hadn't been appointed to anything yet or that hadn't been approved yet. So now he's also going to be acting as the national security advisor. Maybe he's qualified for that role in as much as he's qualified for his role as Secretary of State. But it is sort of interesting. Someone was pointing out he makes Marco Rubio the acting secretary or acting director of whatever it is. As if I don't care about it, I'll have Marco Rubio take care of it, and it's looking like it's holding true. The New York Times was the first one I happened to notice writing the whole situation up. Everybody else was just posting about it, and we need more. So Maggie Haberman, I think, teamed up with David Sanger and Jonathan Swan to give us the lowdown on it. Trump moves Waltz to UN, and there I guess I would say purportedly, but we'll see if they know anything about the dynamics of that, the procedural dynamics, and names Rubio interim rather than acting. I need to get John Lovitz. Can I get? I should go on Cameo and find out how much it costs to have him say interim. And then I'll be able to use that. Now, when they try to disguise the fact that they're acting officials, names Rubio interim national security advisor here. This is the first significant personnel overhaul of top White House aides and the kind of shakeup President Trump has sought to avoid in his second term. That needed to be compacted, of course. Everybody, what do you mean it's the first significant personnel overhaul? He did this all the time last time. Yes, right, okay. But the first significant personnel overhaul of the second term. But the second term is 100 days old. So keep that in mind. All right, so Trump on Thursday boots Waltz, nominates him, that's all we got, nominates him as ambassador to the United Nations, the first significant personnel overhaul, as we just heard. Rubio to serve as interim national security advisor and remain at state as well. Then, let's see, the garbage PR statement was in Trump's, where did he put it? Did it say, Truth Social. From his time in uniform on the battlefield, in Congress, and as my national security advisor, Mike Waltz has worked hard to put our nation's interests first. I know he will do the same in his new role, if he ever gets there. Mr. Waltz had been on thin ice as national security advisor for months, but his position became more precarious after revelations that he organized a group chat on the commercial messaging app Signal to discuss a sensitive military operation in Yemen and accidentally included a journalist in the conversation. As you know, his job was saved at the time, in part because Trump aides said did not want to be seen as giving in to the news media by firing Waltz. So let's wait a few days and then give in to the news media, but say that we didn't. By then, most of Mr. Trump's advisors had already viewed him as too hawkish to work for a president who campaigned as a skeptic of American intervention abroad and was eager to reach a nuclear deal with Iran and normalize relations with Russia. It seems like a weird transition, but okay. Waltz's deputy Alex Wong, who worked on North Korea issues in Trump's first term and who's considered a more moderate Republican with substantial national security experience, is also. All right, so what do you think about that? Where does that go? That sentence should be going, Mr. Wong, who worked on North Korea issues in Trump's first term, considered more moderate, substantial national security experience. Oh, okay, so is he going to become the acting national security advisor in a couple of days? Is he going to be named to replace Waltz? Because after all, he's got substantial national security experience. No, I'm sorry, the end of that sentence is actually, comma, is also expected to be removed, according to senior administration officials with knowledge of the situation. So, well, if you're going to clean house, let's clean house. That guy's incompetent. Get rid of him. And the guy next to him who's competent, get rid of him too, because he's probably got incompetent stink on him. And maybe he does. The official, the one who had knowledge of the situation, and others, who I guess don't, spoke on condition of anonymity to describe internal discussions. Mr. Rubio now has a lengthy list of job titles. He holds the position of Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, something that no other official has done simultaneously since Henry Kissinger. Henry Kissinger, Marco Rubio. You do the balancing act there. But no one has had that since. Kissinger held both titles under the Nixon and Ford administrations. Rubio has also been serving as the acting head of both the gutted USAID and, I forgot this one, the National Archives. Okay, how is he doing with the job?
Brilliant! Thank you!
Yes, thank you. All right, well, I'm glad he's enjoying it. Lots of acting today. The Kissinger experiment has not been considered a success by most historians. The National Security Advisor is supposed to help adjudicate among competing arguments inside a national security establishment, and thus must often resolve differences among the State Department, the Pentagon, and the intelligence agencies, among others. Kissinger was ultimately removed from the post of National Security Advisor and replaced with Brent Scowcroft. But Trump is not running a second administration that has much of a true historical parallel, or I would have said view. It's not much. It does not have much of a true historical view of anything. They don't really know anything that's true about history. One person with knowledge of the discussion said Mr. Rubio had indicated some time ago that he would be willing to serve for roughly 6 months if he was asked to do so. Interesting. Rubio ran against Trump in 2016, but they have developed a close working relationship in recent months. According to several top administration officials, Waltz is being provided a soft landing and praise as he departs the current role while filling the UN ambassador's spot left open when Trump abruptly pulled his nomination of Elise Stefanik. So, yeah, there was some shakeup there as well, I guess. A person with knowledge of the events said that Waltz was not seen as an easy fit ideologically for the president or the rest of his team. Discussions about replacing him have been occurring in private for weeks, but they intensified after the leaked Signal chat. So he sucked from the beginning. Waltz did not join Trump for a trip to Michigan, marking his first 100 days as had been planned. Oh, that's where they were going. Now he's in Florida for the fundraiser, I think. All right. He went to Michigan. Oh, he also went to Alabama to do the University of Alabama commencement speech. So he's been all over the place. Waltz didn't go. He had been planned to go with them, but I guess he didn't. But they said that was because he was handling a foreign policy matter. Sure. The decision to remove Waltz was so abrupt. How abrupt was it? It was so abrupt that many on Mr. Trump's staff only learned of it Thursday morning as it was being discussed among senior officials in the White House. By mid-morning, top aides were told it was true, that he would be removed, and to await Trump's statement, according to the person with knowledge of the events. Tammy Bruce, who, if you can believe it, is no longer just a Twitter troll, but is now the State Department spokeswoman, learned of Rubio's new role during a briefing with reporters after Trump posted about it, just to let everybody know what's going on here. The Secretary of State, you are going to be the acting national security advisor now, and you should prepare for that. But don't tell the State Department spokeswoman. Let the reporters at her press briefing, her daily press briefing, ask her questions about it and let her be unprepared. Okay. That's easy. We can do that. The selection of the next national security advisor will be a critical one. At a moment when the president's top national security and foreign policy aides have differed sharply on how to handle three of America's most potent adversaries. China, Russia, that's not an adversary, and Iran. Trump is making the change just 2 weeks before his first major trip abroad. That's his favorite time period, of course, so it makes sense. Where is his first major trip abroad going this time? Well, where was his first major trip abroad the first time? Right. Saudi Arabia and other Arab capitals in the Middle East where they have sovereign wealth funds and monarchs so that he can be given billions of dollars and make more deals that are illegal and unconstitutional emoluments and then laugh in our faces when he gets back. So, that's all happening in midst of negotiations with Moscow and Tehran. Waltz joined Trump in Rome a week ago for the funeral of Pope Francis. It was in the background of the meeting with Zelensky, which took place in St. Peter's Basilica, by the way, if you were wondering where those photos were from. I was. Waltz, a veteran who had favored a muscular U.S. foreign policy for many years before Trump's rise, has struggled to prove his bona fides to his base. He also barely had time to organize his staff, much less tackle the hardest issues facing the president. Ordinarily, a new national security advisor writes the administration's national security strategy, often a year-long process that involves hashing out differences among government agencies and cabinet members, but that's paperwork, so they didn't do it. On some other major issues, including how to engage China on its ambitions in the Indo-Pacific, its fast-growing nuclear program, its sophisticated cyber attacks in the United States and its allies, and its efforts to reunite Taiwan with the mainland, the administration has barely gotten started. So basically, the rest of this article is about how little he actually accomplished and how you'll barely notice that he's gone. Okay, so I think that brings us up to date on the Waltz situation. And I don't know, it was interesting to watch the personal dynamics of it with who got notified when of what. Also in yesterday's news, we can I think we can squeeze this in before the break takes us out of here, though the alarm is imminent. Yesterday came news. I didn't see anybody write anything up on this, but I haven't searched for it. I'll search for it during the break. But I did see somebody noting on Twitter that photos taken of the group at, quote unquote, at work during the quote unquote cabinet meeting the other day. Remember, the cabinet meeting wasn't referred to as a cabinet meeting because Elon Musk was there making dad jokes. Yeah. Well, anyway, Waltz was there because he was still a member of the cabinet at that moment. And of course, the room's full of cameras. Everybody's taking pictures of everybody from every angle. And I guess he just thought, I'm not the star of the show, so I'm probably not on camera. Someone took a picture of him. He's fiddling. He's with his phone. He's got his phone on and he's texting and whatnot during a cabinet meeting. Somebody takes a picture over his shoulder. And what's he doing? He's in Signal. He's playing in the Signal chats during the cabinet meeting. I guess he must have known by that point he was on his way out the door.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Net Roots Radio. I'm your happy host, David Waldman. You know, I never say that when we come back from the breaks. It's very unprofessional of me, but it is largely a podcast, or certainly something you have to go way out of your way to find and open up live stream. So I always feel like that's a waste of time. But there are many things that I feel are a waste of time and in fact are not. This, I think, is a waste of time, but I'm going to read it to you anyway. I did look to see whether there was an actual news reporting now. There is, about Mike Waltz and his behavior in his last cabinet meeting. ABC News has the, serious news approach for you. I will give you their headline and then read you the story, but with a brief interim from other news organizations that don't feel the same way, I guess. Oh, did I close that tab? Let me see if I can go and open that one up again. Yeah, because that was a good headline. So I'll have it for you here. The serious news headline here from ABC News. Waltz was photographed using Signal during Trump's cabinet meeting a day before his removal. I don't know if that's supposed to insinuate like that's the last straw. There's no more straws left. People often say that there's a lot of straws, but there aren't any. This is the last one. Oren Oppenheim, Hannah Demisi, if I've pronounced that correctly, Ivan Pereira for ABC News, tell you the straight news version of this. Trump's former National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz, photographed using Signal during a cabinet meeting on Wednesday, just one day before the president announced he was replacing Waltz with Secretary of State Marco Rubio. And, I guess the splashy part about this is you can zoom in on the photo and see bits and pieces of the conversation. You can also see that they're using now some sort of an app that I guess is an add-on extension to the Signal app that actually will, I think people were saying this is something that will actually archive messages so that the Signal chat can be Presidential Records Act compliant from here on in. I don't know. Anyway, in the photo taken by a Reuters photographer, the names of people Waltz has been texting are visible on the screen, including Vice President J.D. Vance, Rubio, Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard, and Steve Witkoff, Trump's Middle East envoy, who, as we began telling you yesterday, is such a dope and a dupe that he's actually been approved for attack in the New York Post, of all places. We read about half of that article. We could go back and take a look at why he's considered such a dope on Iran issues, as well as everything else. We'll see whether we have time and whether the discussion leads us back there. White House Communications Director Stephen Chung defended Waltz's use of the app on Thursday afternoon. Why? Saying, Signal is an approved app that is loaded onto our government phones. Thank you for your attention to this matter. There's that throwaway line. So I guess we know every once in a while you see Trump posting on Truth Social something, and then thank you for your attention to this matter, as though it was a complaint letter to, MasterCard from back in the day or whatever. So I guess that's Chung. Unless that's Chung imitating Trump. I can't be positive here, but it's clearly one of those two things. Anyway, that doesn't say anything. Signal is not an approved app. That's not loaded onto your government phones. Now you have an extension for it. Maybe things are getting a little bit closer to, that being true. But anyway, to our knowledge, it is not. Waltz came under fire in March. You know how it all happened. Signalgate. I don't have to rehash that. Anything new here? The Marco Rubio taking his place angle. Trump briefly sort of backing him for a while, then finally firing him. I think that's really going to be about it for ABC News. The reason I brought up another report here was, again, the headline. This is the Daily Beast with when the firewall goes up, I won't even read the headline anymore. Ready for this one? Fired. I got to keep doing it over and over again. Fired, quote, idiot Waltz leaked one last Signal chat with Vance before getting boot. I like the way that's put. So I don't subscribe to the Daily Beast. Maybe you do. I don't know whether the article, and I think too, it's probably might even be able to unlock the article by registering for free, but it's too much of an annoyance with the Daily Beast. And sometimes I get around their paywall otherwise. But, anyway, good headline. I don't know if it's going to add anything to our understanding of the story to read their actual copy on that. But anyway, I thought that was of some interest, perhaps. Let's see. This morning's latest that I just had to grab from CNN, a very interesting, I guess, confirmation, basically, of everything that we always thought was going on and going to happen. This one will bring back memories for all of you dirty effing hippies from the early 2000s who, let's say, just hypothetically, found yourselves invited to a meeting with interested groups, including alternative media outlets like, let's say Daily Kos for these purposes, to the White House to discuss with then President Barack Obama the controversial detainee policies for Al-Qaeda and certain enemy combatants that was held over from the George W. Bush administration post 9/11, as you know, issues of of indefinite detention, issues of torture, issues of unwarranted surveillance of American citizens, all being considered in the national security context. And let's say you and others had said, oh, this is actually a tremendous problem, though we trust you, Barack Obama, to a certain extent, not to go completely crazy with the sort of power that was granted to George W. Bush. We didn't trust his ability to use it wisely. We think he, in fact, used it in a criminal context, overreaching in several instances. But it's dangerous to leave unrefuted on the books this notion that the president alone can simply make a declaration that certain people or certain classes of people will be considered enemy combatants for the purposes of detaining them outside of the justice system. And that it was problematic when George W. Bush did it. It continues to be problematic when you do it. And though we have somewhat more faith that you understand the danger of simply being the guy who can declare someone an enemy combatant, we never believed that George W. Bush had a really good grasp of it. We feared that he would imminently simply declare political enemies, domestic political enemies, to be enemy combatants because there were no checks on the power as the law was written at the time. And I still think there's very little in the way of checks. And the courts were pretty clear in interpreting it. This is a power that belongs personally to the president in his capacity as the elected commander-in-chief, et cetera, and that, of course, no idiot was just going to be like, I don't like the way that guy looked at me. He's an enemy combatant. But I did kind of explicitly say, look, you don't know who's going to be occupying this office later. And we think that it's our impression that George W. Bush and Dick Cheney abused this power pretty broadly, although I guess it never went beyond, well, this guy has an Arabic name, and we think we can establish his links to terrorist organizations, so we're just going to say that, and any inquiries into why we're saying that will be protected by the state secrets doctrine. That seemed like a pretty shaky foundation to go forward with, and it was pretty explicitly expressed, look, if you personally are able to hold the crazy in abeyance for 4 or 8 years as president of the United States, the real concern is what happens when the next Republican administration comes in, and they will pick up precisely where the Bush administration and the Cheney co-administration left off. Ignore what you did for 4 to 8 years. That certainly won't be precedent to them. They will, in all likelihood, though, press even further with it and go well beyond what Bush and Cheney dared to do in their short time in the White House. And, of course, it only gets worse if the next Republican president is, in fact, a lunatic or has dementia or both. We didn't know that was coming, and that didn't enter into the conversation. But certainly that the next Republican administration would do the same and worse. That was definitely mentioned. Oh, well, so now they did. And golly, if no one ever predicted that Donald Trump would be the next Republican president, that's fine. It was a very difficult thing to guess at the time. Certainly when he wasn't running, even when he was running, it was difficult to guess and then believe that he would be president. And yet here we are. But the argument was always pretty clear. You don't want this kind of power in anybody's hands, really, because the fear is that even a competent Republican war hawk type person would be super aggressive with this stuff. A Democratic war hawkish president might be less, but a Republican, was always going to be more aggressive with this, and you just never knew where it was going to go. They were surveilling Quaker peace groups, for God's sake. We're that much away from them simply saying, well, I'm tired of surveilling them. Why don't we just declare them enemy combatants and put them away? Even at the time, people say, wow, Bush, Cheney, as crazy as they are, they're never going to do that. True. However, Donald Trump, not so true. And, as it happens, not so true that he doesn't think that certain members of the Cheney family are guilty of treason. And, how far is it from guilty of treason in Trump's mind to actually enemy combatant? Because the worry always was, well, if all you have to do, if the courts are saying this is just 100% in the president's hands, and all the president has to do is declare the person or class of persons to be an enemy combatant, and then waive off all inquiry with the state secrets, privileges, etc., then somebody like Trump is definitely going to do something like that. And that was the worry. And here we are. Trump administration considers labeling some suspected, and you know how their suspicions go, suspected cartel and gang members inside the U.S. as enemy combatants. Now, more reasonable heads, gray and wizened as they are going to say, well, you see, this is for suspected cartel and gang members. So if we arrest El Chapo, again, dead, we can label him an enemy combatant. So isn't that great? Well, no, he's not actually an enemy combatant in the military sense. You want to come up with maybe a different kind of terminology and a whole different body of law to deal with that. If you think it's an important issue, spend some time on it. Do some work. But no, borrow a different regime entirely and just slap it on there. Sure, that sounds like the Trump administration. But what's worse is, can you name, here's the challenge. Oh, you people are always worried about this thing. Name one person who is suspected by this administration to be a cartel or gang member who's for whom there's really literally no evidence that that's the case. Come on, name one. Kilmar Abrego Garcia? All right, name two. I mean, come on. We know who some of the people are who meet the definition of, quote, suspected cartel and gang members inside the U.S. Now they're going to be, quote, enemy combatants, which is, I guess it's actually kind of interesting now that I think about the fact that they were already sending those guys to Guantanamo before they realized this is stupid. Why am I sending them to Guantanamo? Or I can do it cheaper in El Salvador, and this is just becoming a nightmare. All right, anyway, CNN did this reporting. Lots of people did all this work on it. I should just get to some of this work. Natasha Bertrand is the first byliner on this one. Josh Campbell, Zachary Cohen, Haley Britsky, and Priscilla Alvarez. And I'll bet there's some other names at the bottom as contributing to the reports. They say the Trump administration has been examining whether it can label some suspected cartel and gang members inside the U.S. as enemy combatants as a possible way to detain them more easily and limit their ability to challenge their imprisonment, according to multiple people with knowledge of the deliberations. We, however, are a person without knowledge of the deliberations, but we're going to deliberate this anyway. And by the way, it should be read in conjunction with the thing I started at the very end of yesterday's show, which I'm definitely now going to have to go back to, from Just Security, in which the administration was already using as a dodge in court, transferring or alleging to have transferred prisoners from ICE custody to DOD custody, mostly originally, I think, in an effort to fake up some way of avoiding the court's jurisdiction over the case. You ordered the ICE to release them. ICE doesn't have them anymore. Somebody else has them. Who has them? We're not going to tell you. Well, actually, in this case, it's DOD. Now, what was probably eventually going to happen, we'll see when we get back to the Just Security article, was the courts were going to say, what makes the DOD have authority over, why are they in DOD custody? They're not military prisoners. Oh, well, guess what? Today's news is we're going to make them military prisoners. So I don't know. We already started here with the CNN one. We'll do that. Then we'll jump back to Just Security. If I was positive that was explained as a likely outcome in the Just Security article, i.e. had I read the rest of it before now, I guess I would read that first. But I'm just speculating that that's the case. So CNN says the enemy combatant delegation, a designation rather, and it's always a delegation here. They send them formally, of course, as you know, when they empty their prisons. The enemy combatant designation could also be applied to suspected narco-terrorists, as they now call drug runners outside the U.S., the people said, as a way to potentially give the U.S. a justification to conduct lethal strikes against them. You've doubtless heard about this plan. I don't know if we've ever really discussed it at length, but it's come up a couple times in this 100 days of this Trump administration, bombing Mexico as drug interdiction. Okay, you can't really do that, although you're doing it in Yemen, so I guess you can do that, but you shouldn't. Well, I should or I could if we said that the people I was bombing was enemy combatants. Yes, I believe we did give you that power. I wonder if anyone ever imagined that that could become a concern in the future. Oh, in about 2009 or so. After the 9/11 attacks in 2001, the U.S. attached the label enemy combatant to anyone accused of being a part of or supporting the Taliban, who didn't conduct that strike, Al-Qaeda, who did, or associated forces engaged in hostilities against the U.S., and used that sweeping definition to keep many of them in military detention on Guantanamo Bay indefinitely, without charge, trial, or judicial review. In Guantanamo Bay, really, is where they were. I don't know what, on the Guantanamo Bay Naval Base, I guess. The discussions have revived a debate from President Donald Trump's first term in 2018 and even earlier, when he wanted to apply that label, enemy combatants. Why? Not so much because they were enemy combatants, but because we had left behind permission to just declare something, and he really likes that. So, first term, he already tried this. He wanted to apply that label to all migrants who had entered the U.S. illegally, according to two books written by former Department of Homeland Security official Miles Taylor, now, of course, targeted by an executive order with a executive order bill of attainder. Really? We're going to ruin his life because he confessed to having witnessed this thing inside the Trump White House the first time around. We're just simply going to say all migrants who enter the U.S. illegally are now going to be called enemy combatants because that's of a piece with our stupid rhetoric about it being an invasion, right? Lawyers and policy folks like me, Miles, I guess, said that it was nuts and they'd never meet the legal definition. And if we started treating migrants like terrorists, it wouldn't be just a slippery slope. It would be an effing mudslide into illegality and police state behavior, said, not Miles Taylor, but a former Trump administration official who served at DHS during his first term, which of course actually does describe Miles Taylor, but it's written such that we're supposed to come to the conclusion that it was someone else. One of the people familiar with the current deliberations said this time around the administration was only considering ways to use the label against suspected members of the 8 groups Trump has designated as foreign terrorist organizations, another unilateral power for him, including Tren de Aragua and MS-13. By the way, you may want to spend some time over the weekend reading about the origins of the mythos of Tren de Aragua and where it came from, because apparently in Venezuela and among the Venezuelan community in the United States, not really considered a thing, a little bit like the way they freak out about Antifa. But anyway, this hinges on the idea that they are designated terrorists, this person said. So if they can get away with saying we consider Latin American gangs to be terrorists, then we can make the next step to just labeling them enemy combatants as well. And then we can do anything we want with them. CNN has asked the Pentagon, National Security Council, and Department of Homeland Security for comment. I bet they didn't get any. The administration frequently tries to link migrants with terrorism. On Wednesday, Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard posted on X that the National Counterterrorism Center identified 600 individuals with ties to terrorists who came through our borders illegally, claimed asylum, and under the Biden administration were paroled here within our borders. But I guess there's probably no evidence of it. But you can just post it and walk away. But several migrants the Trump administration has accused in recent weeks of being members of MS-13, Tren de Aragua, or other groups now designated as foreign terrorist organizations have denied having any affiliation with them. That part we understand and figure that they will do. Why not point out that also when asked to produce any evidence of it, officials just simply can't? Or they misinterpret what they're given, like Donald Trump pretending that the letters MS and the numbers 1-3 were actually on Abrego Garcia's knuckles. Trump has expressed extreme frustration with federal courts halting many of these migrants' deportations amid legal challenges questioning whether they were being afforded due process. By labeling the migrants as enemy combatants, they would have fewer rights, the thinking goes. What's up next? No good faith legal argument. Well, why would they ever make one of those? Legal experts say that applying the enemy combatant label to migrants deemed terrorists would not be the easy solution some Trump officials think it could be. There would be no legal basis for it in the first place, experts said. Well, that doesn't matter. Because the enemy combatant designation has only ever been applied to the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and associated forces. That's not a great barrier, quite honestly. It's taking two distinct topics in national security law and hoping no one knows they are distinct, said Steve Vladeck. You know him, professor of law at Georgetown University and a CNN legal analyst. You just can't bend them together without recognizing their myriad substantive differences. There is no good faith legal argument here. Easy to spot if you're Steve Vladeck, easy to ignore if you're Donald Trump, I would say. The label also wouldn't prevent migrants from challenging their detentions in federal court, even if it made it slightly more complicated because they would be in military custody. I'm sure it would be. I think it would be made considerably more complicated, if you ask me. Even if they were to designate all these folks as enemy combatants, it would do nothing to stop their ability to object to their detention if they are in the U.S. Aha, said Chris Mirasola, a former Department of Defense attorney in the first Trump administration, now a professor of law at the University of Houston. Mirasola said those individuals would still need to be afforded due process, even if it adds some more complexity and ambiguity to an individual's case. That is, if they're being held in the United States. My worry is that they, A, won't be being held in the United States, and B, will be removed from the United States rather more quickly as military prisoners than as civilian prisoners. It'll be that much easier to move them to a place where they can't afford themselves of what limited due process the Supreme Court has left to them, i.e. the habeas petitions. But a former defense official who left DOD earlier this month said that likely wouldn't stop this administration from trying. Everything they're doing is hunting for the one weird trick to make deportations unreviewable, this person said. It's a big game of whack-a-mole right now for the courts, but they are whacking anyway, or whacking away. Whatever that's supposed to mean. One open question is whether someone labeled an enemy combatant and sent to El Salvador's mega prison CCOT, where the U.S. has already sent hundreds of alleged gang and cartel members, and in some cases people we haven't even bothered to make that allegation, would be able to appeal their detention and removal. Yeah, well, as long as that's an open question, then it's actually much more concerning than these legal experts are saying. While the Supreme Court ruled in 2008 that enemy combatants at Guantanamo Bay had the right to do so, it's not clear whether that right extends to enemy combatants held anywhere else outside of the U.S., because, of course, the Trump administration recognizes no precedent, no parallel precedent. You ordered that about some other administration at Guantanamo. We are this administration and we're not at Guantanamo. Therefore, nothing applies. Not really the way it works, but that's the way we feel about it. Trump has been particularly frustrated by the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. You know who he is. The man has been accused by this administration of being a member of MS-13, but was wrongly deported, which isn't even the right word, as we've mentioned before, to El Salvador in March. His case has created a protracted legal fight between the administration and federal courts that have ordered his return to the U.S. Time out for a second to talk about that terminology. Interesting debate going on, and we've brought it up a couple of times. Like, this isn't really a deportation, and there can't really be deportation of people, for instance, when they grab U.S. citizens and render them to other countries. Like, you can't deport an American citizen. You can strip an American citizen of citizenship and deport him. But if you haven't done that, then that's not a deportation. It's just exile, I guess, or at least extraordinary rendition. But I did see somebody make the argument that maybe it was actually, in the end, could be wise or helpful or strategic to stick with the deportation terminology, not just because it helps people understand what's going on and not become a distraction by using terms that make them say, what? What are you talking about? Deportation, I understand what it is. Well, you don't, but you can relate to it easier. You think you can understand what it means, and it gets the terminology out of the way. But somebody else was saying, no, if you refer to it as deportation, all of these things as deportation, that gets people mad. Like, it makes them angry that you can't deport an American citizen. They sort of get that. But if deportation, which is still, a popular thing, certainly among MAGA people, but even among some others, to say, well, don't you favor the deportation of criminal aliens? Well, if you put it that way, a lot of people actually do say that. I don't like criminals, and I don't want aliens around me, all of that stuff. But if deportation also covers 4-year-olds battling cancer, and American citizens who just left their wallets at home, and all, if that all is included under deportations, then the questions that the answers you'll start seeing in polling and surveys, do you still favor the deportation policies of this administration? The answer will increasingly become no, as people understand deportation to mean these other things, depriving American citizens of their basic inherent rights and shipping them out of the country with no recourse. If that's part of deportation, I'm against it. It's an argument to be made. All right. Returning to the CNN article, concerns inside the Pentagon. Designating some migrants as enemy combatants could theoretically be a way to expand the U.S. military's role in arresting and detaining them, a law enforcement role that troops are currently prohibited from performing by law. But just as a reminder, one of this past week's so-called executive orders would blow all that up and erase the boundary. It was ordering various departments to facilitate the use of military personnel and material for local law enforcement around the country. Big violation of the Posse Comitatus Act, but something declared by the president, so get out of the way. Anyway, the discussions about it have deeply concerned some Pentagon and career executive branch lawyers. A person briefed, am I late on anything? Yes, I am. Okay, well, we'll play the music, and then we've been instructed by our editing crew that if we just shut up at the right time, it will be a lot easier to fix it later. I think I've gone past that right time. So how about we take a break now and see you after the 1 minute. All right. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I've also come back very late in all this. Okay. It's very confusing when things don't go right, but I'm in the middle of reading you a paragraph and I just can't look at the clock the whole time. I need another person here waving frantically. If we were a professional radio operation, you would have somebody in the control booth like waving at me through a window, or just playing the music without my having to do it. That'd probably be a lot easier. Anyway, concerns inside the Pentagon was what we were reading about in this CNN article about the revival of the enemy combatant concept by the craziest and most lawless president ever. So, discussions about this have deeply concerned some in the Pentagon and career executive branch lawyers. It's not clear where Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth is. Well, why is he? It's not clear why Secretary of Defense is Pete Hegseth right now, and it's not clear where he might land on the issue. I think we can tell. But two people familiar with the matter said some Pentagon lawyers would likely advise against it if it reached his desk for signature. I don't know that would stop him. I think Pete Hegseth lands where Donald Trump tells him to land. He's got no independent basis for pushing back on Donald Trump. Not only does he not have the power to do that, he doesn't have the institutional knowledge to do it. There will be people inside the Pentagon who advise him of it, and he'll say, I never heard of that crap before, and then, side with Trump. I think that's probably the best prediction. For one thing, it's not all that clear to DOD lawyers that the administration could reasonably argue that the enemy combatant label could even apply to members of groups like MS-13 or Tren de Aragua. It would also be legally dubious at best to argue that the U.S. is in a protracted war with cartels and gangs on U.S. soil, another legal hurdle the administration would have to clear if it wanted to label them enemy combatants. I mean, that's what people who understood the state of the law prior to witnessing the Supreme Court abandon the state of the law in several other cases. Would they abandon the state of the law in a case like this? they might, but again, they're sort of digging their own graves here. Like, first of all, in extending pretty much universal immunity to the president, which we've already all half joked means that he could just assassinate any Supreme Court justice that voted not to apply it to him in some specific case and replace him with somebody who would. There is that. But in addition to all that, they must recognize that short of killing them, he could label them enemy combatants, for instance, and ship them off to El Salvador or somewhere else. But we'll see. But when it comes to migrants on U.S. soil, or did we miss something here? Yeah, I think so. Right. That being another, labeling them enemy combatants would be another legal hurdle the administration would have to clear if it wanted to do this. I'm sorry, that's circular. Getting a court to agree that the cartels were, for instance, in a protracted war with the United States on U.S. soil. Like, do you have any evidence of that? No, but what if I said I did and you agreed? That might be a way to do it. Then you could label them enemy combatants. When the U.S. was holding people at Guantanamo during what the U.S. termed the global war on terror, it was relying on the 2001 authorization for the use of military force as a basis for its detention authority and arguing that the laws of war applied. Yeah, and then of course, did we ever? I thought that might finally have been repealed at some point, but maybe it was. There were two authorizations for use of military force, AUMFs, and maybe we repealed the second of the two, but not the first global war on terrorism one because we still felt we needed it, but we retracted the Iraq one. I guess that's my memory of it offhand. Anyway, I guess if the first 2001 one is still on the books, I mean, I guess the argument here is, well, narco-terrorism. So that's terrorism, so that applies, but you'd have to convince people of that. When it comes to migrants on U.S. soil accused of being members of gangs and cartels now deemed terrorist organizations, so step one is already accomplished. This is not an armed conflict or war, said retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Rachel Van Lindingham, who would have been fired had she not retired, I'm sure, a national security law expert and law professor at Southwestern Law School. So legally, very straightforwardly, there is just zero legal basis for the president to declare them enemy combatants. Yeah, well, there's zero legal basis for declaring Kilmar Abrego Garcia a gang member. So we're past there being legal zero basis for things. One of the former DOD lawyers said it does remain an open question, however, whether the administration could argue that the Mexican government is in a war against the cartels that has spilled over into the U.S., making it a party to an armed conflict. They have total control over a whole nation, posing a grave threat to our national security, Trump said in March. Oh, I didn't do it in his voice, referring to the cartels in Mexico. The Mexicans disagree that they have total control over the whole nation, but who cares what they have to say? It's in Spanish, and nobody understands that, right? I don't know what his excuse is, but yeah, that's it. That's one of the back doors to this that they're, I guess, hoping to use. It is an interesting idea. Well, the Mexican government, at least, even if the country isn't actually controlled by cartels, they're at war with the cartels. And if that war spills over onto U.S. soil, then something. Now, how does that get you to bombing Mexico? It doesn't. But, we're going to prevent the spillover by joining the war over there. And then once we're in the war, they're enemy combatants. Well, that's a lot of bootstrapping. Next up is a war at home. Can we try that? Trump has been actively socializing, that's interesting, the idea that the U.S. is at war with transnational gangs and cartels. The cartels are waging war on America, and this is him, they're waging war on America, and it's time for America to wage war on the cartels, which we are doing. We're way behind with their waging war on us, and we're not waging war on them, except we are, because I am a man of action. We are. We are. Okay. He declared earlier this year that at least one transnational criminal group and recently designated foreign terrorist organization, Tren de Aragua, is conducting irregular warfare. This sounds like a written thing. But anyway, conducting irregular warfare against the territory of the United States, both directly and at the direction, clandestine or otherwise, of the Maduro regime in Venezuela. That does sound like a written statement. He then, of course, invoked the Alien Enemies Act as a way to swiftly deport Venezuelan migrants without a court hearing. By the way, I was musing about that, just thinking about the Alien Enemies Act. I know that's so archaic, and we've been talking about it a lot in the last couple of weeks, but it occurred to me that between that and the convictions secured against, well, prior to their pardoning, convictions secured against January 6th rioters under sedition laws, that we actually literally have brought back the Alien and Sedition Acts, about which I remember only this from like AP American history back in the high school days. So there was this thing in the early years of the Constitution and the early years of the Republic. John Adams is president. The Federalists are having trouble. They're worried about invasion or war with France at this point. And there's all sorts of intrigue going on, and they passed the Alien and Sedition Acts. And I'm reminded just from, looking it up and studying that there was actually 4 acts involved in these, and they both are all 4 collectively known as the Alien and Sedition Acts. And the lesson was, boy, that was stupid. That happened in the early days of the Republic when we really hadn't quite nailed down what constitutional freedom was really all about. It was brand new, and we were worried, and there might be a war, and war frightens people. Anyway, it was taught as a sort of a classic mistake of the early Federalists. Just like we're all sort of court packing. Oh, yeah, I remember that. That was bad. It didn't work. FDR wanted to do it. Felt like a good idea at the time for some political reasons, but really it was kind of bad, and there was maneuvering, and anyway, they ended up deciding not to do it, and people just generally thought it was overreach. Court packing, bad. Alien and Sedition Acts, bad. The Great Depression caused by tariffs. This is just sort of the basic lessons of AP U.S. history, and I guess non-AP U.S. history too. But in regular U.S. history, they would ask you to fill in the bubble on the Scantron sheet. A, if the tariffs were good, and B, if they were bad. And then also, how do we feel about Alien and Sedition Acts? Good or bad? Fill in the bubble correctly. AP, you had to write an essay about it. So anyway, okay. So that's where we are with that. But it occurs to me, yeah, Alien and Sedition Acts. Thanks, 1790s. Welcome back. Anyway, the use of the Alien Enemies Act has been struck down repeatedly in the courts. We had another case about it just yesterday, and I think since this is today's article, we might be up to speed on it. They might even mention that. But struck down repeatedly in courts. However, including as recently as Thursday. Oh, I'm sorry. No, it's not the however we're changing directions. It's that idea has been struck down, however. So it sucks and you can't use it. The use of the Alien Enemies Act has been struck down repeatedly in the courts, however, including as recently as Thursday, that's yesterday, when a federal judge permanently barred the administration from invoking it to deport Venezuelans from the Southern District of Texas. So they'll move them over to a different district now. But the administration successfully deported over 130 Venezuelans to El Salvador under the AEA before the courts intervened. More broadly, Pentagon lawyers have been concerned with the Trump administration's growing inclination to use the U.S. military for public safety efforts traditionally handled by civilian law enforcement agencies and courts, one of the people familiar with the deliberation said, because they were also probably familiar with the executive order that purported to do it anyway from just the other day. Similar concerns were raised internally during the drafting of an executive order eventually issued by Trump on Monday, that's the one I meant, which calls for DOD and the Justice Department to explore how military assets and personnel can be used to fight crime, this person added. And the answer obviously is give them all Batman uniforms. Hegseth ordered thousands of troops to the southern border in recent months to help law enforcement agencies repel migrant crossings there. And earlier this month, Trump ordered the military to, quote, take a more direct role, unquote, in efforts to secure the border by establishing a militarized buffer zone there on federal land. As a result, troops can now apprehend migrants who trespass in that area. That too sneaky semantics, but, at least a little bit understandable. But creating a narrow military buffer zone along the border such that if you are crossing the border, you technically are setting foot on a military installation and therefore could be detained for that reason. But, believe me, they're working hard at getting to the point where they can open fire on people approaching the border. That's the only way for them to feel like they're really doing something, and I imagine they're anticipating it with great excitement. Administration lawyers are more open to applying the enemy combatant label to suspected cartel and gang members outside the U.S. The people familiar with the deliberation said that could give the U.S. a justification to use lethal force against them, some officials believe, similar to how the U.S. conducts drone strikes on suspected terrorists in everywhere. Syria, Iraq, Somalia. Now, I don't know how they left Yemen out of this one, but they did. Anyway, I guess that's probably what they're thinking of doing. And I guess that's part and parcel of Pam Bondi insisting that fentanyl interdiction at the border has saved 258 million lives. Clearly, these guys are trying to bring weapons of mass destruction, another vague label that can be applied to almost anything, I guess, if you want to fentanyl, right? It was going to kill 258 million Americans, far worse than any of the dirty bombs that people have said they've been trying to bring in, or I don't know, clean bombs, I guess, sanitized by the heat, I suppose, thermonuclear weapons, whatever it is, chemical weapons, nuclear weapons, dirty bombs, all this stuff that they have said, or Thanos and the Infinity Stones, you pick it. If you can kill 3/4 of the American population, or think you can, with fentanyl, then, that helps them in their leap to making them into terrorist organizations. It's not that they're looking to sell them and make money. It's that they're looking to murder almost everybody in America. Okay, sure. The CIA has similarly been reviewing its authorities to use lethal force against drug cartels in Mexico, CNN reported, and is already flying surveillance drones that are capable of being armed over Mexico. They're capable of being armed everywhere, of course, and in all likelihood, they're already flying those armed flights there now. They're just not saying so. Agency officials have been, quote, cautious, unquote, about using, quote, assets traditionally going after what were seen as military targets now being employed against cartel targets, a U.S. official previously told CNN, but the enemy combatant label could ease those concerns. One of the people familiar with the deliberations explained, so it's layers upon layers. The DOD would be excited to be able to fly their armed drones under what they would consider to be legal conditions. If the president said, well, there's enemy combatants over there, that's why they need to be armed. So worrisome and a bit of a throwback as well to the old days when, the dirty effing hippies were saying, hey, maybe it's not a great idea to just give the president, whoever he may be, the power on his own say-so to say, oh, this is actually a circumstance in which we can whisk people away without trial, detain them indefinitely, and perhaps use torture against them, bomb the countries that we don't like, and more or less do whatever the hell we want to do. Yeah, that would be actually a bad idea. So I wanted to go back to the just security thing that I began reading at the end of yesterday's show. Ryan Goodman writing there, switching from ICE to DOD custody, an alarming violation of court order on deportations to El Salvador. We were reading it yesterday just in the context of the DOJ and the government using semantical tricks to get what they think to get out from underneath the jurisdiction of the courts and be allowed to hold on to people that they were being ordered to otherwise afford due process to, which would have otherwise led to their release. This, an April 23rd piece wherein Ryan Goodman says earlier today, and it's linked here, he discussed One of the sleeper immigration cases that had largely flown below the radar. They're using everybody's initials in those cases rather than their full names. DVD versus the Department of Homeland Security. It's not a digital video disc, but a DVD, the person's name, versus Homeland Security. On Wednesday night, so it's been a while, the Justice Department submitted a filing in district court in which it appears to openly describe steps the government took to essentially evade the court's temporary restraining order. Keep your eye on the ball. Which department had custody of the individuals following the court's order? And whether or not it would be legal for the DOD to even have custody is a question that could simply be answered if they were allowed to designate people enemy combatants. There would be a lot less question among the members of the court about whether or not DOD could legitimately take custody of them. On March 28th, the court ordered the defendants in the case, the Department of Homeland Security, including ICE, and the Department of Justice, the two named defendants there, ordered them not to deport any individual with a final removal order unless and until defendants provide that individual and their respective immigration counsel, if any, with written notice of the third country to where they may be removed, and until defendants can provide a meaningful opportunity for that individual to submit an application for CAT, that's Convention Against Torture protection, to the immigration court. How do you like that? The government now says it did remove these individuals to El Salvador after the court's order. The government's excuse? Well, the removal to El Salvador was carried out by the Department of Defense rather than the Department of Homeland Security, and the former is not a named defendant in the case. An example of the government's Wednesday night filing is excerpted here. Redacted person, an admitted TDA gang member, I guess that's DVD, they call an admitted TDA gang member, I don't know whether they would agree, was removed to El Salvador on March 31st, 2025, quote, by the Department of Defense on a flight where no DHS personnel were on board. DHS did not direct the Department of Defense to remove this person. The Department of Defense is not a defendant in this action. So again, semantical games, right? You're not supposed to remove this person. Well, you didn't say the Department of Defense couldn't remove them. Yeah, that's because the Department of Defense doesn't handle immigration matters. Well, they do if we tell them to. Right, so now if you added the Department of Defense to it, well, guess what? We removed them using a plane that belongs to the Department of Education. What? Why? Under what, what possible claim of jurisdiction? Well, education is important to national security and stuff, I guess. And drugs are bad for education. This is what's coming next, right? And that's why that other case, you found now a 44-page case caption naming every possible government entity so that even these, 5-year-olds serving as the attorneys for the government in these other cases, well, you didn't name this one. Yeah, well, now it's named, okay? The flaw in this attempted excuse, as Ryan Gooden puts it, is obvious. What that statement leaves out, the excerpted part, is which agency had custody of the detainees after the court's order. And what the accompanying ICE official's affidavit makes clear is that the DHS was directly involved in their removal. And that's because DHS had custody of several of the individuals after the court's order and then transferred them to DOD after the court's order. Indeed, DHS apparently transferred some of the individuals to the DOD base in Guantanamo. The base served as a very temporary holding place until their transportation by DOD to El Salvador a few days later. Here is an example taken from the affidavit. On or about March 29th, 2025, redacted person was transferred by ICE to Camp 6, Roman numerals, at the U.S. Naval Station Guantanamo and Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. My understanding is that on or about March 31st, 2025, this redacted person was removed to El Salvador by the Department of Defense on a flight where no DHS personnel were on board. That's supposed to save them. DHS did not direct DOD to remove him. Like, we just looked the other way and DOD took him and we didn't know, so you can't blame us. This switch from one department, which is a named defendant, to the other is not cunning. It appears to be a violation of the court's order, both in the spirit and the letter of the law. All right. So, yeah, not mentioned in here then, and I wonder whether Ryan Goodman has written on it since, is the nexus between this practice and others like it and the new idea about labeling people enemy combatants so that you can remove them that way. I don't know. Let's see what's on the Just Security homepage at the moment. Anything about that might connect the two? No, I guess it's just us. But that's why we read the collection of stories and why we hold on to these things, even if we've started them. If we haven't finished them, there might be a fact in there that needs to be dug out and used to help connect things. Or it could be just something we imagine along the way. Educated guesses about what the ways these things might be used in the future. All right. Well, let's see. Here's the Reuters report, just brief Reuters report about yesterday. Well, it's so brief, in fact, that it's probably not even worth, now some more details showing up. For a minute, it was being blocked. This is about yesterday's ruling that was briefly mentioned in the CNN piece. Trump's use of wartime law for Venezuela deportations is unlawful, judge rules. Luke Cohen and Ted Hessen for Reuters reported it this way. A U.S. judge on Thursday blocked Trump's administration from using an 18th century wartime law to deport some Venezuelan migrants in the most sweeping ruling thus far against a key part of the Republican president's aggressive immigration crackdown. In a 36-page opinion, Judge, they're going to attack him for this, Fernando Rodriguez, look out, in Brownsville, Texas, ruled that the Trump administration has exceeded the scope of the Alien Enemies Act by using it to speed up the deportations of alleged members of the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua. The government labels the gang a terrorist organization. Trump's mid-March proclamation invoking the 1798 law to justify rapid deportations faces multiple court challenges. Judges in several states have temporarily blocked the administration from deporting migrants detained in their districts under the Alien Enemies Act, with a Colorado judge ruling last week that the administration must give migrants at least 21 days to challenge their potential removals in court. Rodriguez's ruling went further. The judge appointed by Trump, during his first term in office, traitor, permanently barred the administration from deporting Venezuelans detained in the Southern District of Texas under the law. We'll see whether it holds and whether they should simply transfer them elsewhere first. His ruling was also the first to outright reject Trump's invocation of the Alien Enemies Act, writing that Tren de Aragua's actions in the U.S. did not amount to an invasion or predatory incursion that would justify the use of the law. The president's invocation of the AEA through the proclamation exceeds the scope of the statute and as a result is unlawful, wrote Rodriguez, whose district includes the detention facility from which at least, stop moving, at least 137 Venezuelan men were deported to El Salvador on March 15th, immediately after Trump invoked the law. Okay. In a statement, the White House spokesman Kush Desai, I don't believe we've run into that guy before, said Trump's election victory had given him a mandate to deport terrorist illegal aliens. But that doesn't really matter. The mandate you need is a legal one, not just I feel like lots of people like me. But they went on to say that again anyway, in different words. The administration could appeal Rodriguez's ruling to the Fifth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, considered by many to be the most conservative of the country's 12 appellate circuits. The Alien Enemies Act is best known for being used to intern and deport people of Japanese, German, and Italian descent during World War II. Yeah, we all remember that. That's what we need to take, I think, from this particular report. And we can move on to a couple other different subjects, but of course we'll have to wait until after the break to get to that. And I guess at this point, what I'll do, I'll never be able to read all the way through this thing. It's way too long and way too detailed, really, for the show. I mean, long is one thing, but boy, does this get weedy. But there is a piece in Prospect, the American Prospect, called Runaway Tren, which of course has to do with Tren de Aragua, and it sort of attempts to explain the origins of our concerns with it. We have read something like it in the past. This is extraordinarily detailed, but it does go over the story of basically how one landlord in Aurora, Colorado, making excuses for his inability to or unwillingness to actually fix the places that he owns up, blamed all of this negligence on gang takeovers. Hi everybody, it's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and patreon.com, patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Boy, there's still a lot to get to. But, we got limited time and limited choices to make here. But I was saying the long story short of the article, which there's no way I could read you. It is, as I've mentioned before, Pocket sometimes estimates the reading time for these things, which is usually about half the time it takes me to get through something like this. Not only because I think their estimates are wrong, but because we take so many detours in the reading, which is, what can I tell you? That's the way we do it. This piece in the Prospect, Runaway Tren, is estimated as a 40-minute read, which would mean something on the order of 17 to 18 hours for me to read through. It's extremely long, but I don't know. It looks pretty manageable as a weekend reading, and I think it might be a little weedier than it needs to be, but it's very thorough. Maureen Tkachik, maybe? TK, you pronounce that for me, TKACIC. It's my best guess for you, Maureen. My apologies. Good work on the piece, Runaway Tren, how a Colorado slumlord's psyop turned into a brand new forever war on Venezuela. I mean, that's a pretty good summation of it right there in the subheader. But we've read this story before, that there's essentially a slumlord guy, originally from the New York area, where all slumlords come from in America, and who bought some apartments out in Colorado. I don't know. I guess he thought that was a good investment or whatever, and immediately started neglecting them because that's how he makes it into a good investment. If I buy it and then just squeeze everybody for rent and then don't pay anything to fix the places, I make more money. Anyway, either through his continuing negligence or as an excuse for his continuing negligence, he began to tell people, well, the reason I can't fix anything is that the apartment complex has been taken over by Venezuelan gangs. I don't think he invented Tren de Aragua necessarily, but I guess he heard that there was such a gang. And, there was some video evidence produced at some point of some people doing a home invasion, breaking into one of the apartments with guns. And 2 of the 4 people breaking into the apartments with guns are wearing bright red hoodies. It's not clear that means anything, but I guess the allegation is, well, you see there, same color, i.e. gang. I mean, 2 guys wearing the same color hoodie plus guns plus breaking into an apartment equals gang. And this guy was basically using it as an excuse for, you can't sue me and hold me liable for all this stuff. A gang has taken over the place. And it just sort of ran away from there, and it became part of the campaign trail rhetoric, and Donald Trump saying, in some places, some whole cities have been taken over by this gang. Someone told him they took over a whole apartment complex. They didn't, but they told him that he did. And in his head, it became, well, what if I don't know sometimes whether he just scrambles it in his brain or whether he actively says things like, actually, I understand. I mean, it's very concerning. This whole apartment complex is taken over by a gang. But wouldn't it be worse if we said it was a whole city? Then everybody would be scared. This could happen to you. I don't live in an apartment complex. It doesn't apply to me. Yes, it does. The whole city is gone. Burned to the ground by Tren de Aragua. It's interesting looking at this collection of surveillance pictures. It's very menacing looking. These guys with the guns going in there. But it is interesting that in one of the surveillance pictures, the frames from still frames from this film, there's a guy who's apparently got nothing to do with it because he only appears. There's 4 frames here. And one guy walking through talking on his cell phone. Now, he could be walking through saying, hey, there's guys breaking into apartment 301 here with guns. We got to do something about this. But actually, they would have turned around and shot him, I would think, if they were the dangerous criminals that they're alleged to be. I think he's just walking through there minding his own business. I suppose you could interpret that as these sorts of break-ins are so commonplace that it doesn't even bother this guy. Anyway, I don't know. You should read this thing. It's very detailed, but the bottom line is exactly that. It is alleged that some slumlord didn't want to pay for repairs, so he made up a story about how the whole place had been taken over by Tren de Aragua, and blah, blah, blah. One thing led to another, and we're now using enemy combatant labeling to try to get people that we think are maybe part of this gang, although maybe we really don't think that. We just want other people to think that, and we don't really feel like proving why we grabbed them or doing any of the research it would take. You should all do research on your own vaccines, but we won't do the research it takes to keep a person in prison for allegedly endangering the lives and threatening the murder of 258 million Americans. That we're not going to look into. If you put this all together, it does seem rather ridiculous. Don't you think? All right. Well, anyway, we won't be reading the runaway Tren article, and I don't immediately see. I searched around. I don't think I came up with anything that we've used for that background in the past, but I do feel like we have read that story before. You should read it over the weekend. So now we can get to a couple of other things. There's, so many other weird ideas here. And I don't know which ones to add to the mix, but I'm really at a loss. We'll say that, let's see, there's a couple related things. Some things we started on yesterday, but didn't get too far into, including the latest crypto scam. And that, too, is a very long read. But I wanted to maybe encourage you. We could read this. It's been a while since we heard from Amanda Marcotte on the show. In fact, we've never heard from Amanda Marcotte on the show. We only read her articles, and we should probably remedy that, but I imagine she's a very busy person, and besides which, I like to read her finished product and do it that way. I'm not an interviewee kind of person, but that one might work out. I'm sure she'd be a fantastic guest, but I don't want to get in her way. Trump's crypto racket, she reminds us in her headline for Salon, reaches into Americans' wallets. She was pitching the story this morning on Blue Sky saying a lot of people think it's not a big deal because they're like, I don't buy crypto and I never would, so he's never going to steal money from me. And she was making the point, oh, yes, he is. The whole point is that he can steal money, lots of it, from all sorts of places. And the more obscure the theft is, probably, the better, because then people won't discover it and try and take the money back. So she's trying to make the point here that, yes, it sucks for you more directly than you think that Trump is into a crypto racket. Trump's crypto firm isn't just corrupt. He is making it easier for fraudsters of all kinds, probably, to take your money. And here's how she puts it. Donald Trump was corrupt in his first term. I'll bet you didn't know that. He was corrupt last time.
No!
Yes, actually, he was. Anyway, all right. So where's my yeah? How come that's not near the yeah? Oh, now it's moved over to
yeah.
In case you wanted to know. You say no, but I say yeah. All right. Well, anyway, he was corrupt in his first term, using various properties as cutouts to collect money from foreign governments and businesses seeking favor. Trump hotels, et cetera, right? The properties also created opportunities to funnel money from the federal government and the GOP coffers into his bank account, forcing both the government and the Republican Party to rent rooms and hold events at Perva-Lago and various other Trump hotels. But all that is a pittance compared to what Trump has set up in his second term. His crypto, scare quotes, firm allows various actors to bribe Trump outside the normal banking system, making it hard to trace payments and hold people accountable. Earlier this week, the New York Times published a mammoth report, and it is mammoth, and I wanted to read it to you, but it's estimated by Pocket to be an 18-minute read, so it's for you to read over the weekend, unless you feel like Amanda does it justice here. Earlier this week, the New York Times published this mammoth report on World Liberty Financial, Trump's relatively new cryptocurrency firm, which greases the wheels for a level of corruption beyond any. That's not really him saying it. You know, he would. I'm just using his phrase. Beyond, like you've never seen before. A level of corruption like you've never seen before. She says a level of corruption beyond anything ever seen in American politics. Much too erudite for his use in offhand speech. Crypto hucksters talk about their industry in deliberately confusing terms, so ordinary people tune it out. But it's not complicated. Trump sells digital, quote, coins online. Buying these coins is a way to write a check to Trump without going through the normal banking system, where federal regulators might interfere. The Times reporters, not the Trump reporters, but the Times reporters carefully documented who is buying coins to, quote, curry favor with Trump. Foreign governments are doing it, business owners who want federal investigations and or criminal charges to go away, and other crypto firms purchasing Trump's endorsement. The latter is no different than Elon Musk writing fat campaign checks to Trump in exchange for a line of Tesla vehicles trotted out on the White House lawn. Except with the crypto grift, the money goes straight into Trump's wallet. Unfortunately, it's difficult to get the larger public interested in Trump selling the presidency for crypto coins, which he will convert to real cash, which is important because if you were really a crypto believer, you'd be holding the crypto. But anyway, Trump's corruption is well known, but doesn't seem to hurt him politically. He was convicted of fraud just last year, leading to a $500 million civil judgment against his company, but he won the election anyway. Many voters seem to believe that as gross as the corruption is, it doesn't affect them or the price of eggs or the price of dolls. Plug it in if you want. In reality, however, Trump's con artistry is a big factor in a larger scamification of the American economy, which hurts everyone. Even those of us who think we're smart enough not to fall for get-rich-quick schemes or snake oil cures being hawked from every corner. Trump promised he'd bring manufacturing back to America, but he's just increasing the number of people out there trying to rip you off. World Liberty Financial's founder, Zachary Folkman, remember Z-Money? Oh yeah, right. Goes by the cringeworthy name Z-Money and got his start in a more pedestrian scam, pickup artistry. I figured that would interest her. He founded a company called, you heard it when we tried to read this story the other day, Date Hotter Girls, that offered the usual array of so-called classes on getting laid, basically, to men frustrated that women have the legal right to say no. This background is perfect, however, because pickup artistry is the distillation of the ethos of MAGA grifting. The con artist promises his audience that they're in on the con, and they will work together to cheat someone else. In reality, the mark is the audience. With pickup artistry, men are told that they can learn to trick women into unwanted sex. But more often than not, they're just fooled into spending a lot of money on useless classes. Unlaid, but poorer. It mirrors how Trump promised his voters he'd make them all rich by screwing over foreign countries. But in reality, tariffs will be paid by American consumers. Or how Trump sells his fans crypto coins at sky-high rates with promises they'll get rich quick, and then collects the check while the value plummets for the investors, the quote-unquote investors. It would be one thing if the only people harmed by Trump's scams were his voters, but because he's president, it's impacting everyone. His relentless corruption and apparent impunity send a message that cheaters prosper. Even many people who don't like Trump absorb this message, if only through a "if he gets to do it, why can't we" mentality. This cultural shift is hard to measure, but it's no doubt a contributing factor to the seemingly exponential growth in scamming, especially on social media. It's impossible to get through the day without seeing influencers hyping shady schemes or ineffective supplements. That stuff increasingly creeps into the advertising stream of otherwise trustworthy personalities online, riding the "everyone else is doing it" mentality. Maybe I'll get back to that in a little bit. This can be most keenly felt around the tech industry, whose leaders are cozying up to Trump even as their products get shadier. The scamification of Silicon Valley is most obvious with the widespread embrace of crypto, but the poison is everywhere. Tesla, for example, is a real car company in that they do make cars that people buy, but experts largely agree that the stock is way overvalued because investors are being hustled by Musk, who pretends to be an engineering genius and is forever making false promises of robots and self-driving cars that never seem to manifest. Artificial intelligence was hyped as the next big thing, but it's increasingly clear that it's not intelligent and has, in fact, made writing and search software actively harder to use. Though it does provide fake girlfriends to lonely men, so the money will keep flowing. It's gotten so that once respected tech billionaires sound like they're catfishing email scams, and no one bats an eye. What are we talking about here? Is that this embedded tweet here? Oh, yes, right. This is Mark Zuckerberg in his nerd glasses, and I think I don't know whether they're the enhanced reality glasses that Meta was trying to push the other day, but he's now wearing nerd glasses. Zuckerberg explains, it says here from this tweeter, how Meta is creating personalized AI friends to supplement your real ones. And this was one of the worst MBA-brained claims I've ever seen in my life. The average American has 3 friends, but has demand for 15, which, again, I don't know. Did we mention this thing yesterday? That kind of pitch for this thing? Like, dude, I think I know why you have very few friends, actually. And it really doesn't have anything to do with, market demand for friends. Don't show me the curve and tell me that AI is going to... Are you telling me AI is inventing the imaginary friend again? Come on. That can't be real. Yeah, I'm pretty sure we discussed this yesterday. Anyway, that's embedded here. That deserves another mention. It's extraordinarily weird and stupid. And Guy, it's okay to have just one good idea. If you made billions of dollars, I encourage you, I implore you, please retire. Stop trying to happen, right? Stop trying to make Mark Zuckerberg happen. Be glad that people were dumb enough and it was early enough in the market that people thought Facebook was awesome, and go home. Anyway, normalization is scary enough, Amanda continues. It makes it much harder for even smart, skeptical people to avoid fraudsters. But Trump, both for himself and to help out all the shifty money grubbers who backed him financially, is taking a sledgehammer to every federal system put in place to make it harder for hustlers to steal your money. That's a good point. Something dodgy is helping him with. The most prominent move was the decimation of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, an agency established after the 2008 crash to prevent banks and other financial institutions from defrauding customers. Without the CFPB as a watchdog, ordinary people are going to see billions snaked out of their pockets every year, and the problem will likely escalate as banks get more comfortable with this no consequences order. Think Bernie Madoff. Remember, he became infamous because he did it to people who this stuff doesn't happen to ordinarily, or they thought it didn't, even though it really did. Trump has also gone after the Federal Trade Commission by firing its 2 Democratic commissioners. The FTC enforces antitrust and truth in advertising laws, making it the enemy of an increasingly scam-dependent Silicon Valley. Politico reported earlier this week that Trump is interfering with the work of the Securities and Exchange Commission, which regulates market trading in stocks, bonds, and other investment products. Trump's personal interest is not mysterious. He's been accused of market manipulation with his erratic tariff policies, a crime that would fall under the SEC's jurisdiction. But he also has a lot of friends, quote friends, who can now pay bribes through his crypto firm, who he'd like the SEC to overlook for their illegal dealings. This stuff matters, even to people with investment portfolios that don't extend past a $500 savings account. The 2008 economic crash was caused by financial institutions engaging in shady and illegal behavior, from financing bad mortgages to selling artificially overvalued investments. One doesn't need to know all the intricate finance lingo about subprime mortgages and investment bundles to understand why we must keep regulators in power who will prevent such shenanigans in the future. But Trump is firing all the cops who keep the fraudsters at bay. If the bottom falls out again, everyone will feel the impact of that money getting sucked out of the economy, even if it doesn't affect the price of eggs. The cumulative loss of income will make life much harder for us all. And it's certainly a good point. And also good reason to read through the New York Times profile of World Liberty Financial. And the reason you want to read that at this point, not so much to reveal the scam as to reveal notes on specific people involved in the scam, I would say. Probably among the most important. All right, let's see. Did we put this back in? I meant to, and I don't know whether I did, put the New York Post, yeah, there it is, story about Steve Witkoff and, why they thought he was a moron back in the queue. And I think I did. We read a good portion of this yesterday. Again, a Rupert Murdoch vehicle, New York Post, for some reason, agreeing to help by being the platform to launch these attacks against Steve Witkoff. And the Steve Witkoff connection for us yesterday was that we had just read that his sons were co-investors with Donald Trump Jr. in another grifty, scammy thing going on, opening a D.C. nightclub called Executive Branch. What a brilliant name. With a $500,000 initiation fee. And they don't have to do anything. And the people who pay a $500,000 initiation fee aren't going to care whether they never open the club. The point is, we had a launch party. You were invited. That's enough. So once again, designing a job for himself that doesn't require any actual work. But interesting that the Witkoff's sons were involved. But what about Steve Witkoff himself? We read basically that Rupert Murdoch's vehicle here was willing to let itself be used to accuse Witkoff of being in way over his head, bringing nobody with him into meetings with Vladimir Putin and his team, allowing himself to be to have all the proceedings translated by Kremlin-provided translators, which also seems weird, but that there was also some question about his ability to deal with Iran. And then let's see, did we read this part about who's in charge? I think we did, and we left off on Iran confusion here was where we didn't read. So I wanted to kind of read into that, since Iran will be making its way back into the news and probably over the weekend as well. Negotiating a nuclear agreement with Iran should in theory be the easiest of Witkoff's jobs, which sounds actually quite complicated. And so it's bad news that it's the most, it's the easiest of his complex jobs, given that most people are saying he's a stumbling idiot. Why should it be easy? Longtime Middle East observers say the Tehran theocracy is at its weakest ever point following more than 2 years of proxy war with Israel and widespread internal opposition. I was going to say maybe it would be easy the way tariff negotiations should be easy because there already were agreements out there that they could just simply turn around and scratch out the name Biden and put the name Trump in and say, we negotiated. There you go. The State Department has insisted that the U.S. position is that Tehran completely dismantle its nuclear and uranium enrichment programs. But so far, Iran has stubbornly resisted, refusing U.S. demands to end uranium enrichment and close its nuclear facilities. Earlier this month, fresh off indirect talks held in Oman, Witkoff floated allowing Iran to keep its facilities, if it promises to keep uranium enrichment levels lower than what's needed for weapons, in a plan that mirrors President Barack Obama's nuclear deal that Trump canceled during his first term in office. So in that case, not scratching out Biden, but scratching out Obama and putting Trump on. You do not need to run, as they claim, a civil nuclear program when you're enriching past 3.67%. Okay. Witkoff told Fox News host Sean Hannity on April 14th. So this is going to be much about verification on the enrichment program. Okay, so there, I guess it's the easiest in terms of making him sound like he knows what he's doing. He can just read the old agreement. And that's wise. I mean, it's cheating, but it's wise cheating. Witkoff, though, walked his comments back a day later, saying that, quote, any final arrangement must set a framework for peace, stability, and prosperity in the Middle East. Oh, is that right? Meaning that Iran must stop and eliminate its nuclear enrichment and weaponization program. Okay. I think one of the worst cases, if he does reach a deal, is that something emerges like a rollback of the program that isn't permanent. FDD research fellow Andrea Stricker said on a recent press call, on a technical level, Iran may say that it's permanent, but in effect, it would retain all its enrichment infrastructure and wait out the Trump administration and bust out of the restrictions. They really need to be put in a position of seeing the nuclear program as a threat to their survival rather than something that protects their survival, Stricker said. Former Trump National Security Advisor John Bolton was more blunt, posting on X Sunday that Witkoff's discussions with Iran are a waste of oxygen. The Iranians are trying to buy time and relief from economic sanctions so that they can rebuild their military. We cannot just tap along with the Iranians, he said, referencing the president's recent concern that Moscow is tapping him along with prolonged talks. Trump is making the same mistake Obama did in 2015. Imagine that. Bolton added, Tehran has every reason to drag out the nuclear talks if Witkoff and Trump allow, according to FDD senior fellow Burnham Ben Taliblu, oh my goodness, as they believe that so long as Washington is talking, Jerusalem is not shooting. And through that prism, everything else flows. The foremost element of Tehran's diplomatic strategy today is not to earn sanctions relief, he added. The foremost strategy is to use direct engagement with the United States as a literal human shield against Israeli preemptive attack against Iran's nuclear and or military installations. Meanwhile, people familiar with the situation say Israel is waiting in the wings to conduct a strike on Iran's nuclear facilities, quietly suggesting it could do so without U.S. military support. It is a badge of honor to be the target of John Bolton tantrum, White House Deputy Press Secretary Anna Kelly told the Post in a statement following publication. He and his fellow warmongers, quoted in this so-called news piece, thrive off forever war, lining their pockets while young people die. And we start another forever war elsewhere. Steve Witkoff has done incredible work securing the release of Americans detained abroad, like Mark Fogel, while leaving behind a massive business enterprise to serve his country. Like President Trump, he is focused on stopping the killing and advancing peace through strength, even if he doesn't know how. And his kids are dedicated to getting a piece of the grift that Don Jr. is into. Okay. I mean, I guess that's a real thing. Anyway, just thought I would put it on the record because I do think the Iran stuff will be heating up shortly, and I hope in not terribly dangerous ways. But I don't know if there's any other way for Iran to heat up and for us to take notice over the weekend. All right, anything else that we can squeeze in or advise you to read over the weekend that we haven't gotten to yet? Oh, golly. I'm sure that there is. but I'm not certain where it would be. Okay, there's certainly plenty of stuff to go over in tariff world. ProPublica had a piece published this week. Politically connected firms benefit from Trump tariff exemptions amid secrecy and what else? And confusion. But that's a storyline that we have long suspected, and I think we've actually done some reading on in the past. But, nothing wrong with spending the weekend confirming your priors just a little bit. And then, of course, a piece we didn't get to during the week, how Trump plays into Putin's hands from Ukraine to slashing U.S. institutions. And this, too, a focus on basically how bad Witkoff is at doing any serious pushback on anything. And another entry in our political union with Russia to own the globalists files. All right, one last thing, I guess, that we could squeeze in is the concept Paul Krugman floated the other day. Interesting. Did Peter Navarro save democracy? Well, we hope not. I mean, we hope democracy is saved, certainly. We just hope that credit doesn't go to Peter Navarro. But what's he talking about here? Basically, it's this concept. Did Peter Navarro, by backing the disastrous tariff scheme and encouraging Trump to go even harder on it, make the failure of Trump's economic schemes so obvious that normie Americans are pushing back and rejecting the whole thing and maybe rethinking the entire Trump experiment from top to bottom? And therefore, in other words, could economic disaster make everybody turn against Trump before he completes his coup against democracy? It's an interesting thought. I wouldn't necessarily credit Navarro for it, but I think it was supposed to be a backhanded joke anyway.
NetworksRadio.com.
You get the idea.
You have been listening to Kagro in the morning with David Waldman.
Well, now I want you to listen to Justice Putnam in the morning with the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Oh, I got to get to a lot of housekeeping next week, boy. Anyway, what he's got first up, another Trump-appointed judge ruled against him in court. That's true. Oh, by the way, he's finally made his first judicial appointment of his second term, too. That's coming up next. We'll see you next week.